Yeah, you can clap for that. You need to clap for Cannon. Oh, by the way, those were half charges. Again, let me welcome you to Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park. And this is, we're commemorating the 155th anniversary of the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. We're just a little bit past it. The battle itself was on June 27th, 1864. But the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain is really so much bigger than just what took place here within the park boundaries. Because the battle is part of something that we call the Atlanta Campaign. A campaign, a series of battles that are going to start actually in May of 1864, just this side of the Tennessee-Georgia border. If you've ever driven to Chattanooga, Tennessee, if you go from Atlanta, you've actually traveled the Atlanta Campaign in reverse. I-75 basically follows a huge chunk of the route. And that's not for, there's a good reason for that, because the railroad is the key to this whole thing. And you've got mountains to the east of us, mountains to the west, flat spot in the middle, great place to put an interstate, great place to put the railroad. See, both sides need the railroad. See, in the north, you've got the Northern Army under William T. Sherman. We are representing soldiers of the United States Army today. And he has with him 110,000 troops and over 250 cannons. That requires a lot of supplies. His supply base is in Nashville. It goes from Nashville to Chattanooga and then Chattanooga south. The Confederate commander who is tasked with defending Georgia is Joseph E. Johnston. He has 65,000 troops with him and around 170 cannons, and they need their supplies coming from Atlanta. And it's all on the Western and Atlantic Railroad. It's actually the same rail path today, roughly, that it was during the Civil War. So these battles are going to pretty much revolve around where can they get supply. And so Sherman's going to move into the state of Georgia. And his orders are to destroy the Confederate Army, break it up, and then drive into the South and tear up as much of their war-making industry as possible. And Sherman said, I will follow them to their inmost recesses, make them fear and loathe us, and you cannot qualify war in harsher terms than I will. He's going to try and bring this war to a speedy conclusion by waging war against the Confederates' ability to supply their army. Now, Johnston, he is desperate to try and prevent Sherman from driving in to Georgia, but he's kind of handicapped because he has fewer men and he has fewer cannons. So what the Confederates will do, they will adopt a defensive strategy. They will entrench themselves, dig those ditches that they can fight from on high ground across the railroad. Well, Sherman, he sees, hey, there's the Confederates up there on the mountaintops. I really don't want to attack that. And he will end up going around. He'll do what's called turning the flank. He'll get behind the Confederates, threaten their supply line to Atlanta, and the Confederates, they have to retreat so they don't lose their supplies. And that's what happens from May to the middle of June 1864. The Confederates entrench, the Union Army goes around. The Confederates entrench, the Union Army goes around. And they literally move from North Georgia all the way down here to what we call the Kennesaw Mountain line. Now, the simple reason why we have a battle here is actually quite easy. The railroad is just across the street behind me. The Confederates put cannons up on top of the mountain. Well, with cannons up on top of the mountain, you control that railroad. We now have the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain is set up. So Sherman comes up to this position. He sees there's the Confederates up there on the mountain. He says, I really don't want to attack this. And he tries to go around. That's what's called the Battle of Cold Farm. See, the Confederates, they didn't fall back this time. They actually shifted troops and are going to put up a fight on June 22nd, 5 days before this battle. And so Sherman said, I've tried to go around. My supplies are up here in Kennesaw. I might need to go ahead and try and fight the Confederates now before they get across the Chattahoochee River and into Atlanta. And so what's going to happen is he sets the date of the battle. He says, we're going to attack on the morning of June 27th. Now, on the morning of the 27th, here's the plan. The Confederates, they're spread out on a line almost 9 miles long. So Sherman's thinking they're thinly held. So what he wants to do is a artillery bombardment. Remember, he has more cannons. He uses that artillery to break up the Confederate defenses and march his soldiers and break through the Confederate line, hopefully winning a major victory for the North in this very important year, because it's an election year for Abraham Lincoln. So on the morning of the 27th, the Federal gunners, they man their position. When the signal gun is fired, all along the line, guns begin firing on the Confederate position. One Confederate, he said, hell had broke loose in Georgia sure enough. They could hear the artillery bombardment as far away as Atlanta as a rumble in the background. And it was incredibly, the sight, the sound was overwhelming. But all that artillery bombardment really did was warn the Confederates they're about to attack. And so the Confederates, they are ready for what's about to happen. So Sherman's plan, right where we are, Sherman is going to do a diversion. He's going to do a feint. He's going to try and trick the Confederates into thinking he's attacking here, when really he's attacking further south of us, and south is roughly that direction, so behind you. And so Union troops will come out of the woods, move forward through this area right where you are, so there were no cannons here during the battle, because this would be a terrible place to be, and going to move towards the mountain. The Confederate works are just behind the Georgia Monument that's behind you. And so they're going to try and fool the Confederates. The Confederates do not take the bait. They will leave their troops in place, and the main battles are going to be at a place called that we call Pigeon Hill and Cheatham Hill. Cheatham Hill, if you ever get a chance, it's tour stop number 5. You need to go there, because that's where the two armies, they actually were closest together. And when the Union Army attacked, eyewitness accounts said that the blue soldiers just filled the small valley in front of them. And one of the Confederates, he said, the Union soldiers came up and took deaths as coolly as if they were automatic or wooden men. All you had to do was load and fire to kill someone else. So as the soldiers are marching, the Union artillery, they can't fire because they're too close to the Confederate army. But the Confederates don't have that problem. They had their guns camouflaged, and they had piled brush in front of them. So when the attack commences, they wait till the Confederates are within about 30 yards, and they open fire with canister. Canister is a tin can full of iron balls. It is devastating, wiping holes in the Union lines as they march up in those battle lines shoulder to shoulder. And they're able to actually get in the Confederate trenches. And at one point, they said, we threw rocks and beat them in their faces with sticks, and the Yankees did the same. There's hand-to-hand fighting in the trenches all along what will become known as the Dead Angle. But very quickly, the Union Army cannot sustain that fight. The fortifications are just too good, and the Confederate artillery is too well placed, but they're not going to retreat. What the Union soldiers will do is they'll back off about 30 yards from the Confederates and start digging their own trenches. They'll actually dig a tunnel and try and dig under the Confederate army with the idea of filling it full of gunpowder and blowing it up as a great 4th of July fireworks display. Well, needless to say, they won't be able to do that because the Confederates, they're going to have to retreat. See, one of the last part of Sherman's plan, if the attacks didn't work, he still got troops trying to get around behind the Confederate line. And those troops are successful. And Johnston, he very quickly realizes, there's actually Union troops closer to Atlanta than we have our Confederate troops. And on the night of July the 2nd, he is going to have to withdraw off of the Kennesaw Mountain line. So even though the Confederates technically win the battle, they are going to have to retreat in closer to Atlanta. And as we get to that, we're going to fire one more time. So everybody stay right where you are. Remember, cover your ears. If there's any puppies, hold on.